Shadows over Innsmouth by H.P. Lovecraft. During the winter of 1927 to 1928, officials of the federal government made a strange and secret investigation of certain conditions in the ancient Massachusetts seaport of Innsmouth. The public first learned of it February, when a vast series of raids and arrests occurred, followed by deliberate burning and dynamiting, under suitable precautions, of an enormous number of crumbling, worm-eaten, and supposedly empty houses along the abandoned waterfront. Uninquiring souls let this occurrence pass as one of the major clashes of a spasmodic war on liquor. Keener news followers, however, wondered as the prodigious number of arrests and abnormally large force of men used in making them, and the secrecy surrounding the disposal of the prisoners. No trials or even definite charges were reported, nor were any of the captives ever seen thereafter in regular gowls of the nation. There were vague statements about disease and concentration camps, and later about dispersal in various naval and military prisons, but nothing positive ever developed. Innsmouth itself was left almost depopulated, and it is even now only beginning to show signs of a sluggish, revived existence. Complaints from many liberal organizations were met with long confidential discussions, and representatives were taken on trips to certain camps and prisons. As a result, these societies became surprisingly passive and reticent. Newspapermen were harder to manage, but seemed largely to cooperate with the government in the end. Only one paper, a tabloid always discounted because of its wild policies, mentioned the deep-diving submarine that discharged torpedoes downward in the marine abyss just beyond Devil Reef. That item, gathered by chance in a haunt of sailors, seemed indeed rather far-fetched, since the low black reef lay a full mile and a half from Innsmouth harbor. People around the country and in nearby towns muttered a great deal amongst themselves, but said very little to the outer world. They had talked about dying in half-deserted Innsmouth for nearly a century, and nothing new could be wilder or more hideous than what they had whispered and hinted at for years before. Many things had taught them secretiveness, and there was no need to exert pressure on them. Besides, they really knew little, for wild salt marshes, desolate and unpopulated, kept neighbors far from Innsmouth on the landward side. At least I am going to defy the band on speech about this thing. Results, I am certain, are so thorough that no public harm save a shock of repulsion could ever accrue from hinting at what was found by these horrified men at Innsmouth. Besides, what was found might possibly have more than one explanation. I do not know how much of this whole tale has ever been told to me, and I have many reasons for not wishing to probe deeper, for my contact with this affair has been closer than that of any other layman, and I have carried away impressions which are yet to drive me to drastic measures. It was I who fled frantically out of Innsmouth the early morning hours of July 16th, 1927, and those frightened appeals for the government inquiry and action brought on the whole reported episode. I was willing enough to stay mute while the affair was fresh and uncertain, but now that is an old story, with public interest and curiosity gone, I have an odd craving to whisper about those frightful hours in that ill-rumored and evilly shadowed seaport of dust and blasphemous abnormality. The mere telling helps me to restore confidence in my own faculties, to reassure myself that I was not the first to succumb to a contagious nightmare hallucination. It helps me, too, in making my mind regarding a certain terrible step which lies ahead of me. I never heard of Innsmouth to the day before I saw it, and for the first and so far last time, I was celebrating my coming of age by a tour of New England, sightseeing, antiquarian, genealogical, and had planned to go directly far from ancient Newburyport to Arkham, whence my mother's family was derived. I had no car, but was traveling by train, trolley, and motor coach, always seeking the cheapest possible route. In Newburyport, they told me that the steam train was the thing to take to Arkham, and it was only at at the station ticket office when I was demurred at the high fare. When I learned about Innsmouth, the stout, shrewd-faced agent whose speech shewed him from no local man seemed sympathetic towards my efforts at economy, and made a suggestion that none of my other informants had offered. "You could always take the old bus, I suppose," he said with a certain hesitation, "but it ain't thought much of hereabouts. It goes through Innsmouth. You may have heard about that, and so the people don't like it. Run by an Innsmouth fellow, Joe Sargent. But never get any custom from here, or Arkham either, I guess. Wonder if it keeps running at all. I suppose it's cheap enough, but I never hear more'n 2 or 3 people in it. Nobody but those Innsmouth folk leaves the square front of Hammond's drugstore at 10 a.m. and 7 p.m., unless they've changed lately. Looks like a terrible rattletrap. I've never been on it." That was the first I ever heard of the shadowed Innsmouth. Any reference to a town not shown on common maps or listed in a recent guidebook would have interested me, and the agent's odd manner of allusion roused something in like real curiosity. A town able to inspire such dislike in its neighbors, I thought must be rather unusual and worthy of a tourist's attention. If it came before Arkham, I would stop off there, and so I asked the agent to tell me something about it. He was very deliberate, and spoke with an air of feeling slightly superior to what he said. "Innsmouth? Well, it's a queer kind of town, at the mouth of Manusette. Used to be almost a city, quite a port, before the War of 1812, but all gone to pieces in the last 100 years or so. No railroad now. B&M never went through, and the branch line from Rowley was given up years ago. More empty houses than there are people, I guess. No business to speak of, except fishing and a few lobstering. Everybody trades mostly either here in Arkham or Ipswich. Once they had quite a few mills, but nothing's left now except one gold refinery running on the leanest kind of part-time. The refinery, though, used to be a big thing. And old man Marsh, who owns it, must be richer and crocious. Queer old duck, though. He sticks mighty close to his home. He's supposed to have developed some skin disease or deformity late in life that makes him keep out of sight. Grandson of Captain Obed Marsh, who founded the business. His mother seems to have been some kind of foreigner. They say a South Sea Islander. So everyone raised Cain when he married an Ipswich girl 50 years ago. They always do that about Innsmouth people. The folks here and hereabouts always try to cover up any Innsmouth blood they have in 'em. But Marsh's children and grandchildren look like anyone else far as I can see. I've had 'em pointed out to me here, though. Come to think of it, the elder children don't seem to be around lately. Never saw the old man. And why is everyone so down on Innsmouth? Well, young fellow, you mustn't take too much stock in what people here say. They're hard to get started, and once they do get started, they never let up. They've been telling tales about Innsmouth, whispering mostly, for the last 100 years. I guess, and I gather up more scared than anything else. Some stories would make you laugh, about old Captain Marsh driving bargains with the devil, or bringing imps out of hell to live in Innsmouth. Or about some kind of devil worship and awful sacrifice in place near the wharves, where people stumbled on around 1845 or thereabouts. But I come from Patten, Vermont, and that kind of story doesn't go down with me. You ought to hear, though, what some of the old-timers tell about the Black Reef on the coast. Devil Reef, they call it. It's well above water a good part of the time, and never much below it. But at that you could hardly call it an island. The story is that there's some kind of legion of devils seen on that reef, sprawled about or darting in and out of some kind of caves near the top. It's a ragged and uneven thing, a good bit over a mile. Toward the end of the shipping days, sailors used to bring big detours just to avoid it. That is, sailors that didn't hail from Innsmouth. One thing that they always had against old Captain Marsh was that he was supposed to land on it sometimes at night when the tide was right. Maybe he did, for I dare say the rock formation was interesting, but it's barely possible he was looking for pirate loot and maybe finding it. But there was talk of his dealing with demons there. Fact is, I guess the whole of it was really that Captain had a bad reputation to the reef. That was before the big epidemic of 1846, when half the folks in Innsmouth was carried off. They never did quite figure out what the trouble was, or probably some kind of foreign kind of disease brought from China, or somewhere by shipping. It surely was bad enough that the riots over it and all sorts of ghastly things doing, I don't believe, ever got outside the town, and it left the place in awful shape. Never came back. There could have been more. Can't be more than 300 or 400 people living there now. The real thing behind the way folks feel is simply race prejudice. Don't say I'm blaming those that hold it. I hate those Innsmouth folk myself, and I wouldn't care to go to the town. I suppose you know, though I can see you're a Westerner by your talk. What a lot of New England ships. Used to be you have to go to queer ports in Africa, Asia, or the South Seas, and everywhere else. And what queer kinds of people they sometimes bring back with them. Probably heard about Salem man that came home with a Chinese wife. And maybe you know there's still a bunch of Fiji Islanders somewhere around Cape Cod. Well, there must be something like that back at the Innsmouth people that always was badly cut from the matter. It was clear that old Captain Marsh must have brought home some odd specimens when he had all 3 of his ships in commission back in the 20s and 30s. There certainly is some strange kind of streak in the Innsmouth folk today. I don't know how to explain it, but sort of makes you crawl. You'll notice a little in Sergeant if you take his bus. Some of them have queer narrow heads with flat noses and bulgy starey eyes that never seem to shut. Their skin ain't quite right, rough and scabby, and the sides of their neck are all shriveled or creased up. Get bald too, very young. The older fellows look the worst of it. Fact is, I don't believe I've ever seen a very old chap of that kind. They must die of looking in the glass. Animals hate 'em. There used to be lots of horse trouble before the autos came in.